the next presentation will be by Uwe Starfinger from the Kühn Institut in Germany, and he will provide some insights into how the impact perceptions of non-native tree species like the black cherry can change over time. So yeah, I'm looking really much forward to your presentation, Uwe, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm trying to share my screen.
Yes, you're on a good way.
Oh,
you
great.
see, it worked perfectly. We can see everything. Great, thank you.
Okay, hi everybody. It's good to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting me. It would be so much nicer, of course, to really be in a room with you all, but that's what we have. For this talk, I've teamed up with Bart, who will talk later today, because we have both worked on the species and we feel that we share quite a few ideas about this. So looking at black cherry, it may not be hugely important as such for the Alpine region, but it comes with a very nice story and has some very general messages that are probably applicable for other non-native tree species. So I think it's a good idea to have these talks here. And this means that the ones talking after me are Martin and Bart, and they will both at least partly speak about the same species. So it's a nice idea if I give you some general introduction into the species. So as you can see from the picture, it's really a beautiful species. It has nice flowers, very nice shiny green leaves, which turn golden to copper in autumn. And this was among the first motivations to bring it over from America to Europe as really one of the first forest trees as early as the 1620s. And it was also the main motivation for people to plant it in their parks and gardens for its horticultural value. It can also grow up to form beautiful trunks up to 1 meter in diameter and probably more than 30 meters in height. And in its native range in North America, the timber is very much sought after. It's one of the most important timber products of the forest in eastern US. And this again was also motivation for people to try and plant it in Europe to produce similar valuable timber than it did in the US. Another important feature is that it has these nice fruits, the cherries. You can eat them. They don't taste quite like the normal garden cherry, but they're okay. But more important is that many mammals and animal species like these cherries, and so they disperse the seeds over some areas. And so this resulted in the observation that black cherry can spread from where it was planted. So with these three characters of the species, I've already mentioned three different perceptions. People perceive it as a beautiful horticultural species, people perceive it as a potential timber producer, or people perceive it as a invasive spreading species. So why are these perceptions interesting? And let me shed a short light on regulations of invasive alien tree species. We have seen some of these mentioned before today. And I don't think I need to go very much into detail here, but what I want to point out is that in order to regulate a species on whatever scale, you need a risk assessment. And we've heard Anja talk about risk assessments and how they have to be fit for purpose. So all of these regulations come with their own fitting risk assessment procedures. And yeah, you can read that, or probably you can read that later when you have another chance to look at the talk. What I want to say is really that what do we do in a risk assessment? We basically try to describe the potential of establishment, of spread, and of impact. And it's important to stress that, of course, risk assessments use the current knowledge or the current ideas we have about species. So this is where the perception comes in. And the most important of these characters that we look at is, of course, the impact. So let's have a short look at the impact of black cherry on forest ecosystems. it can be very easily shown on the plot basis that where you have a high cover percentage of black cherry in the shrub or tree layer, you have a low number of forest floor plant species. And when you leave the dense stand of black cherry and go to a part where there is a lower cover, you have the high number of your forest floor species again. So that's quite easy to demonstrate, and it has been done in a number of studies. It's not a big surprise, really. If you look at a picture like this, you would probably assume this going on, where there is really a dense layer, nothing much can grow underneath it. It becomes more interesting when you look at different temporal and spatial scales. But all in all, the fact remains that black cherry does suppress native species, and also including the young seedlings of the trees that you want in your ecosystem. So yes, there is an impact. Let's look at another trophic level. We've talked about plants so far. Let's look about insects and other critters that feed on it. These leaves here were taken from my garden, and they already show you that something is obviously nibbling at black cherry. And this fact was proven much nicer by the Dutch colleagues a few years ago, who looked at herbarium specimens of black cherry and the native congener Prunus pardus. And interestingly, they showed that whereas black cherry as an alien tree was little accepted by herbivores in the early times, this figure rose over the course of 150 years to a value that is even higher than that of the native Prunus pardus, which remained affected in the same way to the same degree over all this time. So we see a change going on here. We see a changing acceptability of the species by native insects. We also see another change when we look at invasive insects like the spotted winged Drosophila that made the headlines a few years ago because it's very important pest of horticulture and viticulture. And this creates a very interesting system. Is the invasive fly able to reduce the impact of the invasive cherry because it feeds on the fruits and reduces the fertility of the cherry? Or is the invasive cherry a stepping stone for the invasive fly to reach one horticultural area from the other one? These questions are not fully answered yet, but what I want to point out with these examples is that things change, and things change at the same time in the adaptation of the native herbivore community as well as the arrival of new herbivores. So yeah, the message here is the alien plant does not remain completely alien to the ecosystem, but it can change and it can be more integrated in the ecosystem in the course of time. Now, people noticed impacts, and naturally they tried to reduce these impacts by management. And management has been going on for 50, 60 years in several European countries, most notably the Netherlands, but also Belgium, Germany, and others. And people try to invent all kinds of management techniques. Cutting doesn't really lead to much because the plant will resprout. So they looked at uprooting all trees, they tried girdling, they tried herbicide injection into the stem, and they even tried biological control by using this fungus. And in the long run, really all these management trials didn't really come with a big success. This can be shown by the example of the Netherlands quite nicely. So in the 60s, when people already tried to control the species, there wasn't so much in all of the countries. Today, there's so much more, and that is even though so many millions of euros have been spent trying to reduce it. So I have talked about impacts and impact perceptions and how they changed in the course of time. And we have put this together in this graph some time ago. And this shows you that the ideas that people had about black cherry in the course of the century has changed, whereas the ornamental purpose was really in the foreground at the very early time after the import from America. The idea to produce nice timber was soon dropped because it was shown that under the conditions where it was planted in Europe, it didn't really do much. It didn't really grow up to these nice trunks. It has come back a little because obviously in some situations, it's the only thing that you can do with it. I haven't talked much about soil, but it's a similar story here that at a point in time, people thought that black cherry would be very good for the forest soil. And it turned out that this wasn't really based on sound information. So the idea was pretty much dropped. Similar with the wind and fire break. And I showed you the history of trying to control the species. For quite some decades, people thought we have a problem, so we control it. Until sometime late in the 80s, the first voices were raised that it may not really be possible to control it. And so in a similar way, people changed their thinking about whether it really deserved the term forest pest, which was quite widely applied in the 60s and 70s. And so in the end, people thought that maybe not only do we have to live with it, but probably we also can live with it. So this was a very short overview of the changing impacts and changing ideas. And it comes with very simple take-home messages. Know your enemy as well as you can if you talk about an invasive alien plant species, and try to make informed decision whether it really is so bad. And it's a shame that this has to be said because it should be self-evident. It's not really a good idea to stick to outdated concepts, but it's really a better idea to look at the growing body of information that's available and try to apply your ideas about the species according to that. And we will hear more in this way later by Bart. And with that, I say thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uwe, for this nice overview on black cherry. Are there any questions to Uwe? So far, I don't see a question in the chat.
I would have one. Sorry. I found it very interesting, this change of opinion, the perception of the non-native tree species. In our Alpine space, we have the situation that in the same timeline, we have very different perception on the same species. So depending on who is working with it, what experience have been made, what is the regional legislations in all these different 48 regions we have in the Alpine space. So do you have a tip for us how we overcome those perceptions?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it really relates to what I showed. And obviously, yes, these perceptions can be present at the same point of time by different people for different situations. So I think, yeah, the message is that you really need case-by-case decisions, taking into account the ecological situation, the ideas of stakeholders, etc. So I think this is pretty much in line with what Anja has told us earlier, that it really is not enough to put a verdict on a species and call it invasive or not invasive, and then think everything is answered by that. On the contrary, you have to look at specific situations where you really have so much impact that you need to do something about it, and others where you think you can still profit from the beneficial sides of a species.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.